Saturday morning has a feeling you don't forget. The light comes in slow. The house is completely quiet. Nothing is waiting on the counter. No pile of things that didn't get done. No list sitting on the table reminding you of the week that just ended. The checkered floor is clean. The vintage kitchen is still. The weekend is ahead of you, completely open, completely yours. Now ask yourself, when was the last time your Saturday morning actually felt that way? For most of us, Friday bleeds straight into Saturday. The dishes from Thursday are still in the sink. The laundry is half finished. The errand you kept pushing back is now the first thing on the weekend list. The house didn't stop needing things just because you stopped working. And so the weekend becomes a second shift, not a rest, not a reward, just more of the same without the excuse of a workday to blame it on. She didn't live that way. The woman who kept the home in the 1950s understood something that we have almost entirely lost. Friday was not simply the last day of the week. Friday was a closing day. A day with its own purpose, its own rhythm, its own set of tasks that existed for one reason only. So that Saturday morning could feel exactly like that image. Calm, finished, earned. And it started early. Earlier than you might think. If you are new here, and this kind of content speaks to you, the old systems, the forgotten rhythms, the ways ordinary women kept their homes and their lives running on almost nothing, please consider subscribing. It costs you nothing, and it means these ideas keep getting made. And before we go any further, tell me where you are watching from. What country? What state? What part of the world? And did Friday ever feel like a real closing day in the home you grew up in? Drop it in the comments. I read them. Now, Friday morning. She was not sleeping in. That was not what Friday meant to her. If anything, Friday had a particular energy to it. Not the heavy push of Monday, not the midweek grind of Wednesday, but something more deliberate. Friday had direction. She knew what the day was for before her feet touched the floor. The first thing she did, often before the breakfast dishes were even cleared, was open the house. This sounds small. It was not small. In homes that were lived in all day, where cooking happened 3 times daily, where children came in and out, where laundry dried and stoves ran, and bodies moved through every room, the air inside a house told a story. By Friday morning, that story needed refreshing. She pulled back curtains. She cracked windows even in the colder months, just long enough to let something new in. The house breathed. She let it. This was not a romantic gesture, it was practical. Fresh air changed the feeling of a room faster than any amount of cleaning could. She knew this the way she knew most things about the home, not from a book, but from watching, from being taught, from paying attention to what worked and what didn't. While the house aired, she moved. Friday morning was not deep cleaning day. That had already happened. Monday or Tuesday was for the heavy work. Scrubbing floors, cleaning the oven, washing walls. By Friday, the home was not dirty. What it needed was a reset. A light, deliberate pass through every room that said, we are closing the week, and we are closing it properly. She started at the top and worked down. Bedrooms first. The linens were assessed. If the sheets had been changed earlier in the week, they were straightened and smoothed tight. A pulled sheet, a plumped pillow, a tucked corner. If they were due for changing, Friday morning was when that happened. Not because it was laundry day, but because sliding into a clean bed on Friday night meant the weekend began with something already luxurious, already taken care of. Pillowcases were checked, blankets were folded. Nothing was left draped over a chair or bunched at the foot of the bed. The bedroom was not a storage room, it was a room for rest. And it needed to look like one, especially heading into the 2 days when rest was the point. She moved through the upstairs the same way. Bathroom surfaces wiped, towels straightened or replaced. The mirror checked. Nothing dramatic, nothing that took more than a few minutes per room, but each room touched, each room closed. Then she came downstairs to begin the reset there. The living room got its own version of the same treatment. Cushions set right. Surfaces cleared of anything that had drifted in from the week. A magazine left open. A child's toy, a coffee cup that had made its way to the wrong table. She was not fussing. She was resetting. There is a difference. Fussing is anxious. Resetting is intentional. She moved through those rooms with the calm efficiency of someone who had done it enough times that her hands knew where everything belonged without her having to think about it. The floors were swept or given a quick once-over where needed. Not mopped. Again, that was earlier in the week. But swept because a floor with crumbs underfoot on a Friday morning would bother her every time she crossed it. And she didn't see the point in being bothered by something that took 3 minutes to fix. All of this, the airing, the linen check, the room-by-room reset, was finished before midday, often well before. It was not a heroic effort, it was a practiced one. She had a sequence, and she followed it, and because she followed it every Friday, it never grew into the kind of overwhelming task that would require a whole Saturday to dig out from under. That was the quiet genius of it. By the time her children were at school and her husband was at work, she had already moved through the whole house with intention. The rooms weren't perfect in the way that a magazine spread is perfect. They were settled. They were ready, and there was a difference in the air. Not just because she had opened the windows, but because the house had been attended to. Friday morning was not about catching up. Catching up is what happens when you've fallen behind and you're scrambling to close a gap. That frantic, guilty energy of I should have done this sooner. She didn't carry that into her Fridays. The morning reset was not a catch-up. It was a close down. The same way a shopkeeper turns the sign at the end of the day, wiped the counter, and locks the door. She moved through her home and said quietly, without drama, "This week is ending, and it is ending in order." That is a different feeling entirely, and it shaped everything that came after it. Because once the house was reset and the morning was settled, her attention shifted. There was still the matter of the week's unfinished business, and she had a system for that too. A simple one, almost a rule. What it came down to was this: nothing that belonged to the week was going to be handed off to the weekend. The list was going to be cleared before Friday gave way to Saturday. That midday window was where it happened. She had a list, a simple mental record of her duties. Not always a written one, though some women kept a small notebook in the kitchen drawer for exactly this purpose. A running record of things noted during the week that hadn't yet been handled. A button that had come loose on her husband's shirt. A jar of flour that was running low. A letter she owed her sister. A hem that needed 2 minutes of attention and had been waiting since Tuesday. Small things. The kind of things that, left alone, have a way of multiplying. The midday hours on Friday were where that list met its end. This was not a casual arrangement. It was closer to a household law. Unwritten, unannounced, but held to with the same quiet consistency as any other rule in the home. The weekend was protected. Saturday and Sunday were not overflow days for the week that had just finished. They were their own time, with their own purpose, and she treated them that way. Whatever the week had started, the week was going to finish. If something could not be finished by Friday afternoon, she made a clear-eyed decision about it. Either it got done now, or it was formally set aside until Monday. What it did not do was follow her into the weekend uninvited. That boundary sounds simple. It is harder to hold than it sounds. Most of us don't hold it at all. We carry tasks the way we carry worry, without meaning to, without deciding to. Just letting them trail along behind us from one day into the next until the weekend arrives already loaded. She refused that. Not loudly, not with any great declaration. But in the most practical way possible, she sat down at midday on Friday and she finished things. The errands, if there were any, had been run earlier in the week or on Friday morning itself, folded into the natural movement of the day. The grocery shopping was typically done by Thursday so that she was not scrambling. On Friday afternoon, with a dinner to prepare and a store to navigate. This was not luck. This was planning. The kind of low-level, forward-looking planning that made Friday afternoons possible. She thought one day ahead, always. It kept her from being trapped by the present moment. The household accounts, if she kept them, and many women in this era did, managing the weekly budget with careful attention, were settled on Friday. Numbers written, receipts accounted for, the week's spending noted. There was something grounding about closing the financial picture of the week at the same time you were closing everything else. The week was not just a collection of days. It was a unit, and a unit has an ending. She mended on Fridays, small mending. Not a large sewing project, but the quick repairs that kept clothing presentable. And extended the life of things that would otherwise be quietly set aside and forgotten. A loose button took 4 minutes. A small tear in a seam took less. These were not chores she enjoyed or resented. They were simply part of the midday close, the same as rinsing a glass is part of washing up. You didn't think about whether you felt like doing it. You did it because it was Friday, and Friday was when it got done. Did your mother or grandmother have a day like this? A day that felt different from the rest of the week? A day that had its own particular rhythm, its own jobs that belonged only to it. If you grew up in a home like that, you probably remember the feeling of it even if you couldn't have named the system at the time. Something about Friday, or maybe Saturday morning in their version, that felt more deliberate than the other days. That feeling had a cause. It was built. Someone built it, quietly, week after week, until it became the texture of that home. The thing that made the midday close work was not discipline in the motivational sense. It was not willpower or a personal philosophy about productivity. It was structure. The tasks had a designated time, and because they had a designated time, they did not expand into the rest of the week. The week held its shape. Work that belonged to Monday stayed in Monday's territory. Friday's job was to sweep up whatever remained and put it to rest before the weekend began. She also rested during these hours. That needs to be said plainly, because it would be easy to read this picture and imagine a woman running at full pace. From the moment she opened her eyes until the moment dinner was on the table. That was not accurate and it was not sustainable. The midday hours included a pause, a cup of tea, a few minutes with a magazine or the radio, a moment of sitting. She was not lazy for taking it. She was organized enough to have earned it. The pause was possible because the morning had been used well. The rest existed because the work had a container. She was not resting to avoid something. She was resting because the list was shrinking, the rooms were already calm, and the afternoon had a clear shape to it. There is a particular kind of rest that comes when you know what is left to do, and you know you are going to do it. It is entirely different from collapsing on the sofa because everything is still undone and you don't know where to start. She knew that difference in her body, even if she never would have described it that way. The children would come home from school in the afternoon. The house would fill with noise and movement again. Bags dropped, snacks needed, voices overlapping. She had timed the midday close so that by then, the week's business was handled. She could be present for the afternoon without half her mind still running through the unfinished list. This mattered. Presence is easier when the background is clear. And as the afternoon settled and the children occupied themselves, her attention began moving toward the kitchen. Not with urgency, not with the tired mechanical obligation of another meal to get on the table. Friday dinner was different from Tuesday dinner. It always had been. She had been thinking about it since morning. Friday dinner was not a weekday dinner wearing a different name. She understood this in a way that didn't require explaining. The Tuesday meal was practical, something nourishing, made efficiently, served and cleared so the evening could continue. Wednesday was much the same. Thursday, if there were leftovers to use, was thrifty and unfussy. But Friday dinner was the first meal of the weekend. It carried a different weight. It marked something, and she prepared it accordingly. The kitchen in the mid-afternoon on a Friday had its own atmosphere. Something was already on the stove or waiting to go in the oven. The smell reached the front of the house. If you walked through the door on a Friday afternoon in one of those homes, you knew immediately that the evening was going to be different. Not because anything was extravagant, because something was intentional. She didn't need a special occasion to set the table properly. Friday was occasion enough. The tablecloth came out. Not the everyday plastic-coated cloth that wiped clean in seconds. The real one, or the nicer one, the one that required ironing and therefore rarely appeared on a Tuesday. Placemats were arranged. The salt and pepper were placed in the center rather than left wherever they had landed the night before. If she had flowers from the garden or a simple arrangement she had put together earlier in the week, they went on the table. If not, a candle was enough. Something that said, "We are sitting down together tonight, and tonight matters." The dishes she used on Friday were a step up from the everyday set. This did not mean expensive. In most households of this era, the good dishes were not dramatically fancier than the regular ones. They were simply the ones saved for moments that deserved them. Using them on a Friday was a quiet act of generosity toward her own family. She was saying, without words, that they were worth the nicer plate, that the end of the week was worth acknowledging, that the weekend beginning was something to mark. The meal itself was thought about, not assembled. A better cut of meat when the budget allowed, a small roast, a whole chicken, something that had been selected with Friday in mind when she was at the market earlier in the week. A vegetable prepared with a little more care than usual. A dessert, almost always, not elaborate but present. A pie made that morning, or a cake from the day before, or simply a bowl of fruit with cream. Something sweet at the end of the week said that the week had been lived. And now it was finished, and this was worth a small celebration. She cooked in the afternoon without rushing. This mattered enormously. The Friday kitchen was not a stressed kitchen. She had the time because she had made the time. The morning reset was done. The midday list was cleared. The house was in order. There was nothing pulling at her attention. The children were nearby. The house was calm. And she was doing what she had been doing all day in a different form, closing the week with intention. Cooking without pressure has a different quality to it. Anyone who has cooked a meal in a rush, eyes on the clock, the table not set, knows what that food tastes like. It tastes like stress. It tastes like obligation. Food prepared in a calm kitchen tastes different. She knew this. It was just experience. The preparation was part of the ritual, the sound of roasting, the rhythm of chopping, the satisfaction of a kitchen working purposefully, warmly, without chaos. These were not incidental details. They were the point. The Friday kitchen was doing its best work, and she was the reason for it. Do you still set a real table on Friday nights, or has that quietly slipped away? Not a judgment, a genuine question. Because it slips away easily. The takeaway containers arrive, the paper plates come out, everyone eats in a different room, at a different time, and Friday becomes indistinguishable from Wednesday, except that tomorrow is not a school day. It happens gradually and then completely, and one day you realize the week never had an ending, it just stopped. Her Friday table gave the week an ending. When the family sat down, the mood was different from a Tuesday. Her husband had come home to a house that was already calm, already settled, already smelling like something good. The children sat at a table that told them, without anyone having to say it, that this was a special meal. The conversation was easier when the space was right. The table itself was doing some of the work. After the meal, the dishes were cleared and washed the same evening. This was not negotiable. Leaving the Friday dishes for Saturday morning would have undone everything. Saturday would have begun with a chore instead of a clean slate. The kitchen was closed before she went to bed. Every surface wiped, every dish in its place. The dish towel hung straight. The kitchen light turned off. Closed meant closed. And when the kitchen was done and the house held the last warm traces of the evening meal, she did one final thing before the weekend. Something small. Something that completed the day the way a period completes a sentence. She walked through the house. She wasn't cleaning at all. That needs to be said first, because it would be easy to picture her moving through the house with a cloth in her hand, finding things to scrub at 9 o'clock on a Friday night. That was not what this was. The house was already clean. The kitchen was already closed. The week's work was already done. This was something else entirely. Quieter, slower, more deliberate than cleaning. It was closer to what a captain does when walking the deck of a ship before nightfall. Not fixing, checking, confirming, closing. She started where she always started. The living room first. A cushion pressed back into shape. A lamp switched off that had been left on. A book returned to its place on the shelf rather than left splayed open on the arm of the chair. She was not fussing over these things. She moved through the room with the ease of someone who simply knew where everything lived and was returning it there. It took 4 minutes, maybe 5. The room looked, when she was done, like a room that was resting. Not abandoned, not neglected. Resting. She moved through the downstairs the same way, the hallway, shoes paired and placed, coats hanging straight, nothing left on the floor that would meet someone's foot in the dark. The dining room. Chairs pushed in evenly, the tablecloth smoothed if it had shifted during the meal. The candle extinguished if one had been lit. Each room received one full, unhurried look. Not a search for problems, a confirmation that things were right. Then, upstairs. The children's rooms were checked last, usually after they were in bed or close to it. This was not an inspection. She was not looking for mess to correct or rules to enforce. She was making sure the room was set for morning, that tomorrow's beginning would be smooth rather than scrambling. clothes thought about for Saturday, a cup of water on the nightstand, a window cracked if the night was warm enough. Small things. The kind of things that make a child's morning feel already cared for before the child is even awake. Her own bedroom was the last room. The bed already made from the morning was turned down. Her own things for Saturday were considered, not laid out with military precision, but thought about so that tomorrow held no small surprises. A few minutes in front of the mirror, the end of the day's routine, the quiet work of taking care of herself the way she had been taking care of everything else all day. Not as an afterthought, as a close. Then she went back downstairs. The kitchen light was the last light. She stood in the doorway for just a moment. The way you stand in the doorway of a room when you want to confirm that it is exactly as you left it. And then she turned it off. The house went quiet in a different way after that. Not the quiet of things being unfinished or pushed aside or waiting for tomorrow. The quiet of a house that had been fully attended to, a house that was done with the week. That was the feeling she was building toward all day. Not a sparkling magazine-perfect home. Not an impossible standard requiring a staff or a superwoman who never got tired or distracted. Just a home that reached the end of Friday in good order, tended, closed, ready for whatever the weekend brought, because the weekend was not going to begin with unfinished business from the week that just ended. Saturday morning, when it came, arrived into something already calm. She didn't wake up to a list. She didn't open her eyes and immediately start calculating what still needed doing. The floors were clean. The kitchen was reset. The linens were fresh. The small repairs were made. The errands were run. The dinner had been cooked and eaten, and the dishes from it were already washed and put away. There was nothing owed to the week. She had paid her dues before sleeping on Friday night. The weekend was hers, fully, not a partial rest interrupted by catch-up tasks. Not a Sunday that felt more like a Monday Eve than a day off. A real weekend, 2 days that belonged to living. This is what the closing routine gave her. Not a perfect home. Not a life without difficulty or the ordinary frictions of running a household, and a schedule that allowed very little margin. She had all of those things. What she also had was a system, a simple, practiced, weekly rhythm that kept the house from accumulating weight it didn't need to carry. The rhythm was consistent, and consistency is what made it work. Any single Friday done in isolation would have produced a pleasant enough evening. But a Friday routine held week after week, month after month, becomes something more than a routine. It becomes the architecture of a life that feels ordered. It becomes the reason Saturday morning always feels like the same quiet gift. We stopped doing this somewhere along the way, not all at once and not on purpose. These things rarely end on purpose. The week got longer, the boundaries between work and home dissolved. Friday became just another evening. Dinner became whatever was fastest, and the weekend became the place we stored everything we hadn't managed to finish. The closing ritual was one of the first things to go because it didn't look essential. It looked optional, decorative even. The tablecloth, the walkthrough, the kitchen light switched off with intention. Who has time for that? But the women who did it weren't doing it for appearances. They were doing it because they understood, practically and without sentimentality, that a week without a closing becomes a week that never quite ends. That a home without a Friday rhythm is a home that carries the weight of every unfinished thing, straight into the days that were supposed to be for rest. That the weekend feels earned only when something was actually done to earn it. She earned it every Friday. In the same order, through the same rooms, with the same quiet intention. And on Saturday morning she woke up to the proof of it. In the clean kitchen, the straight rooms, the made beds, the cleared list, the smell of nothing left undone. That is a feeling worth rebuilding. Not by doing everything at once or by holding yourself to an impossible version of the past, but by choosing one Friday, this Friday maybe, to close the week properly, to finish the list and clear your mind, to set the table like it matters, to walk through your home before you go to sleep and return everything to where it belongs. Turn the kitchen light off on purpose. See what Saturday feels like when you do. If this kind of content speaks to something in you, these old systems, these forgotten rhythms, the quiet wisdom of women who figured out how to make a home feel like a home, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. There is more where this came from, and it is worth your Friday evening to find it.